conclusion as to what they really mean, what kind of effect that they have. From time to time, they may have a question of you, and then after that's all done, then we turn the floor over to you to come back at it and, you know, ask whatever questions. So I'd ask that at the time Hanover summarize what you've done, what you see as maybe conclusions, where you may need to go from here, depending on where we decide that as a group that the review of the project is, and then move on.
It's Chris Fazio. Hey, listen, I made a mistake. I apologize. I thought this was a meeting with just our staff. You're welcome to come back.
President of Hanover Engineering.
You're welcome.
I know Scott Brown has been in front of the board a lot of time, most of the time, and Andy. Scott is out of town today, so plus this is important enough for, it's a very important thing that we make sure you feel comfortable and understand what we've done. And if there are any items that need to be adjusted, we're 100% on board to take care of that for you.
I forgot, excuse me, this is Andy from Hanover. For the benefit of these two gentlemen, could you guys both?
You're saying one more thing, engineering.
This meeting was advertised in the paper.
We went.
You're supposed to.
We've designed the park project and gone through various reviews and obtained the reviews from the agencies. And reading Mr. Haig's review letter and the comments, and if you would like to go through every comment, I can. I don't want to do that. It is not an excuse, as I'm sure you've seen it many times. Engineers come in, stormwater calculations and requirements are based off of putting a scientific or a mathematical calculation into an event that's created by nature. Every engineer will look at them slightly different. And bottom line is to do what's right and do the best we can to address the stormwater runoff. So with that, if you read through Mr. Haig's review, he does make a number of comments that that are minor in nature. They are a comment, but it is a drainage area of, instead of 28.9 acres, it's 29.1 acres. It's almost about scaling how the math is done. Is it going to react or going to make a measurable change whether the water leaves the property? Not that it's going to impact the neighbor any more adversely or not. We did take a number of Mr. Haig's comments and looked at them. I think the major one, the biggest one that will impact or could have an impact on discharge of stormwater is the time of concentration measurement. That's when a raindrop hits the top of the property, how long it's going to take to get down through your property and discharge onto leave your property line. We have looked at that. We can definitely provide calculations to your engineer for this. It has absolutely no measurable impact on the final number that we have leaving the property. As in, right now, I believe, just some quick numbers, currently, the way it is now, with no detention, just the base, or just the field the way it is. I don't know if you're familiar with the pipe that's discharging from one side of 903 onto the Bear Creek property. There's just as an example, there's a 44 CFS getting to that pipe. Now, of course, we probably realize that it doesn't always get through that pipe. It may overflow, it may back up on both sides or on our side of the road. But anyway, the number 44 is what gets to that piece of pipe. After this basin, after the design is done, what's leaving the 44 CFS is a volume, a rate rate that's getting to that point, not how many gallons, it's just how fast it's a cubic foot per second. With the basins that are designed, and even using the newest, or the adjusted, or we tweaked the time of concentration to agree with what Mr. Haig was directing, or suggesting. For the 100-year storm, it's instead of 44, it's down to 22 or 23 CFS. The number may have adjusted from 20 or 21 to 22 or 23. What's there now is 44, and so it is still a number that, if you look at the park as one piece and not the specific little pieces in the park, what's getting to the property line, or 903, and then onto the adjacent property. None of the suggestions or details or revisions that Mr. Hagan suggesting that are legitimate, legally have to address. I'm not talking as an attorney, I'm just saying by ordinance. None of them are going to impact the downstream neighbor or take a reduction to what's flowing to the downstream neighbor, any additional of what we've already done. Does that all make sense?
Let me just ask you one question.
Sure.
When you're talking about this discharge of 44 cubic feet per second coming off the property into the neighbor,
That's as it is today, sir.
that's as it is today?
Yes.
Okay, that's before we do anything.
Correct.
And after our improvements, how many cubic feet per second is this water runoff going to be?
Approximately 25.
So that's going to be less
Correct.
than what we have existing today.
Yes.
That's the part I wanted to be clear on. Thank you.
Now, and let me just explain some of the reasoning of that is right now there's no detention. It's a different surface than what's going to be there. So they can say, not they. The way you look at it, it's, okay, it's field now, you're going to make it grass, it's going to run off a little quicker, there's going to be some pavement. All of this does create a different rate that the water is going to run off the property. That's why there are detention basins designed to hold that rate instead of allowing it to slowly work through the grass as before at the higher leads. Now it's going to run off a little quicker. The detention basins are there. There are requirements to regulate your amount, the rate of your discharge, and that's what these basins have done. There's orifices on the outlets of them that they will hold the water and regulate it to what the ordinances allow. And that's where the 22 or the 25 is what is designed to come off.
So the 22 or 25 would be a decreased flow, which would be a benefit to the adjacent property owners, correct?
Yeah, let me clarify this because I know the question always comes up. We are talking rate, okay, how fast it's flowing off the property. Okay? We're not talking a reduction in the amount of water
Right,
flowing off.
but it's flowing off at a decreased rate.
Rate, correct.
Correct.
So, we have looked through the review letter, we've rerun some calculations. As I said, we can provide some of this updated rerunning calculations addressing things like the atomic concentration and provide them to the township or township engineer for their review, or just to clarify that I'm not just telling you this, and if you would like. But basically, the bottom line is there's very, very minimal number change, if any, on the comments created. So, I don't know how much detail you want to go into anything else, or if Mr. Haig wants to say anything, or if there's questions from the board.
I think you'll have a chance to rebuttal in case we do have questions. I think you pretty well clarified what I needed to hear.
It's your show, Bob. You want to do that?
If Bob, may I, okay, I'm not
Yeah,
putting
no,
you
go
on the
ahead.
spot,
No,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
not putting you on the spot, and you don't have to answer if you don't. I believe you reviewed, or your company has reviewed these calculations and stuff, and just if you
And
have
I'll
any
say
comments on them.
we looked at them, we haven't reviewed them in detail because it's your design, and I don't know that the supervisors have really authorized me to spend 25 or 30 or 40 hours reviewing them in detail, so that
Yeah.
we haven't, and I'm not gonna question that they say that, in the end, it has minimal effect. I've talked to them on the phone about what their results are, what they're finding out and whatnot, and I don't question that. What I would offer is an opinion, and let me digress back to Charlie's comment. Stormwater is very theoretical. You get 3 or 4 stormwater professors in the room, they have 3 or 4 different ways of doing it, different time of concentrations, different modeling of the hydrographs that calculate the volume in, different ways of geometrically describing those, some more conservative than others, some not conservative, and it's an opinion of our firm that 3 different people design a stormwater basin. You get 3 totally different ways, or sometimes very different ways of accomplishing the same task. And as professionals, if they're saying that their accomplishment of this task is not increasing the flow, until I'm authorized to do a very detailed, minute analysis, I have to accept that as professionals. And often I think you find that with stormwater being plus or minus 20% accurate, if you're lucky, and that's if you're lucky, that slightly different methodology accomplishing the same task is just a different way to do that. Same with structural design. 2 totally different structural designs for a 3-story building. Doesn't mean one is wrong and one is right. They'll both hold the building up and accomplish the same task. And I think that's kind of where we are. And I would ask Bruce, and I think his letters have said that in the end, he doesn't expect that it will change much. There's been a whole bunch of correspondence on that, Bruce, and I apologize for not remembering the exact words, but if it doesn't change much, and we are, no matter what, still having to address if the problem is the stormwater that's there now that creates issues with the houses, that stormwater is going to be there later.
Well, the stormwater that's there now is an existing issue that's been there for the last 50 years.
And that is going to be there.
And that's going to be there regardless of whether we go ahead with this project or not. Actually, what we're doing is retarding the flow
Based on their comments.
based on their comments, correct?
Yes. And
So that's an improvement.
yes. And talking with PennDOT on this issue, their main concern, and they've looked back at historical area photos as we have, there used to be a swale that went from the west end of that pipe out toward the lake to carry water. That's been filled in. That creates some exit parameters that actually impact the township stormwater on their side, but still, that swale being filled in does not concentrate the water, lets it flow, and we've all seen those pictures of how wide the water gets there. That's an issue that's there now, it's gonna be there later. Practically speaking, I'd say let's all put our heads together and see how we as, and I say we, as the township or as a group can figure out some way to fix this issue and fix it expeditiously. And the township certainly has the ability to waive certain requirements that may make it a lot easier to do and to ask for help from, if need be, regulatory agencies to help us clean this up. And I know, talking with PennDOT, they certainly are amenable to helping out.
Would you agree that that swale was filled in when those homes were built there?
I'm not sure if when the homes, certainly filled in after the picture when there was no homes there. I have a picture with no homes, there's a the fine swale, it looks like it could carry maybe a decent amount of that water. When you see the later pictures, that the fine swale is not there. So that's part of the issue of not having a conveyance of water, allowing it to spread out a lot wider. If that truly is the issue, let's get our heads together and use all of our engineering expertise and fix that, and I'll be happy about it. That's my.
But I can fill Alan in. The swale, you have Laura Getz and Barbara and Jimmy Smith. The swale was filled in prior to them even building their homes. So when PennDOT did Google Earth and went through all the different dates and everything, the swale, like you said, was there, shows it was there. These houses weren't there when it was filled in. You know what I mean? So it wasn't because of the construction of those homes there. It was filled in prior. So the landowner, whoever they bought from, actually took care and grazed that all off and got rid of that flow going through.
Now, where that swale is, Bob, is that an official easement that PennDOT has?
I haven't seen any old documents, and I talked with Ralph Clay about the possible existence of old documents, and he said the only thing would be as if Audrey at the
Conservation.
District, who's I think on the zoning hearing board, but her father was the developer, and she
Right.
may have inherited some of the old plans, but that would be the only shot we have, unless you guys have some in your files that would show easements. But I honestly would think that if there's people impacted by the stormwater, and we're putting our heads together with a fix, I know if somebody came to me and said, can you give us an easement? We'll pay for whatever it costs to get that easement, paperwork drawn up, so that we can put a pipe or swale or do whatever to make your problem go away. I'd be more than glad to.
Would PennDOT have a record of an easement?
They, talking with them, they have not said that they did.
Melissa Malkin said that she could not find it.
And I think Greg could say, though, that with respect to the laws and adjudicated cases on stormwater, you have a right to discharge your stormwater at no more rate than you're doing now onto your downstream adjoiners. So there is somewhat of a presumed easement.
I think
for
we would
that.
have an easement by implication, or easement by implication would exist to meet this purpose of getting the water off the property and out of the way.
And that basically translates into the downstream owner can't stuff something in the pipe and stop the water.
Okay.
You guys all swear?
Unless there's questions, I mean, the way, what I understand is the concern with the downstream landowner. So I wanted to address where the water's leaving township property. And that's what I hopefully have done. That's why I just stopped at that. If there are any questions on anything upstream, I know a number of comments deal with grading of fields and things like that. That's not related to the stormwater issue or the downstream property owners, in my opinion.
Do you have any comments, Bob?
I think you guys were basically because of vacations and whatnot, not quite done looking at all of the little minute issues in the comments, and may have a little more time to spend on it. I'm not sure. Since
Yeah.
I talked, you finished that up.
That's correct, but we didn't plan on coming back and addressing the comments.
Understood.
And if you would like us to, we will. And I hate to, I don't want to waste your time, but also, bottom line is, it's where it's leaving the property that is, as far as the joiners concerned, that I'm aware of.
And what that would translate into, if they did address every single comment, we probably need a mediator in that, which by the process of elimination would be myself or my firm, and that would translate into a decent amount of time and expense to then get into the minutia of the design, the minutia of the comments, and determine pros and cons of each.
Maybe we should move on to Mr. Hague at this point.
That would be appropriate.
Thank you very much. The issues I addressed concern far more than peak rate. What I basically said was that the hydro report, as developed, was not adequate for design. Now, this is not my opinion. There are standards that you follow. That's the BMP manual from DEP that tells you how you do stormwater runoff. That's the erosion sediment control manual from DEP that tells you how you do erosion and sediment control during construction. National Engineering Handbook, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Hydrographs. Time of concentration. The Saldo. Your Saldo. The user guide for the HydroFlow Autodeck program. That's what I reviewed it against, not my opinion. Now, we have just heard that the 100-year storm event has now gone to 44 CFS for that culvert. That's a 20% reduction in what was in the report. My comments were the report was not adequate for design. And it appears now that after going back and checking the time of concentrations, putting the right numbers in, we now have a different peak discharge rates. Yes, it is true that the requirement from DEP is only the post-construction peak discharge for each storm event be less than the pre. And you only have really two that make a difference, and that's drainage area E1, which is the northern half of the site, and E2, which is the southern half. That E3 that goes back towards the woods is so minor it's not worth anything. Now, I would like to see a copy of the revised hydro report, because that BMP manual says that when you do basin routing and determine the second thing, the volume of storage required, you must use the modified rational method or TR55. There's no option. The rational method is not a valid method for design.
So you're saying the storage area for the water that we're retaining is not adequate?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that they use the rational method to determine that storage method area, and that is not allowed by the DEP. Now, I'll modify that because they really didn't use the rational method. They came up with some abomination of the rational method by adjusting the ascending and the receding factors. It's not a rational method, it's not a modified rational method. It is something in between. I have no idea how in the world they ever came up with it. I sent an email to Bob and to Andrew, and I said, how did you come up with these numbers? Because those numbers that they're using do not coincide any way, shape, or form with anything that is being published by USGS, U.S. Geological Survey, or by the National Engineer Handbook, Natural Resources Conservation Services. And those are the two premier organizations that develop these standards.
So what is the implication of the method that they used as far as the water runoff or the water storage? I'm not an engineer. Can you put this in layman's terms?
If, in layman's term, if they use the rational method for peak discharge, that's fine. And they now are saying that the rational method corrected for all the comments that I had in section 1 for peak discharge is less than what was in the November 30th report by 20%. I'd like to see that. I want the board right now to tell Hanover, give me a copy of the report.
Could Hanover address his comment?
Well, we did say, where let me just state, and I don't know where Bob pulled out his comment about looking at it, it's 10 to 20% different, no matter who looks at the way you do things, okay? If it is 20%, sir, And are you talking the pre-development where I said 44 CFS?
You're saying, I assume you're talking the 100-year storm. You're
That is
saying
correct.
that now is 44. It was 51.36. You're saying now that once you made the corrections to the hydro report, that it is less than what it was before.
And
Okay.
I did say, sir, that if the board would like, we will submit
I
that.
would certainly like the copy.
Going back to what Bob Cox said, and correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned that a variance of 20% either way of the mean is not consequential. Is that correct?
I was always taught, and I've been an engineer since too long ago that I don't even want to mention, but I was always taught that there are such assumptions to be made and inadequacies in the measurements of kinds of concentrations and actual rainfall mimicking the storms that you're trying to mathematically create, that it's pretty hard to say that I'm exactly where the answer should be. That can go plus or minus 20% either way, as far as I understand
Does
it.
Mr. Hay agree with that?
It's not a
agree with that
disaster.
proposition?
That's not the question that should be answered.
No, I'll answer that
I-
question
yes,
first
there
and
is-
then
yes,
pose your
yes,
other
I
question.
agree. I won't say it's 20%, but I'll agree there are different ways of doing
There's a
calculation.
deviation, whatever it may be.
There's going to be a deviation. The question here is that they used the same methodology, they corrected their errors, and now we have a 20% reduction in peak rate.
But if
What
that's,
does it mean ultimately
What it
to
means
your
is this, what it
client?
means is that once you go from the peak rate, you can't use that rational method to size your detention basins. DEP says you can't do it, and there's technical reasons that I'm not gonna get into today, and we can discuss it for 3 hours.
but the point is
point is
a
this.
variance of 20% of the mean acceptable on either side?
The point is that once you go from determining your peak rate, your second thing you must do is determine your storage volumes. You have to determine the storage volumes. You cannot use the rational method to determine storage volumes.
But you just said our storage tanks are adequate for the
No, I have
volume.
not said that. I have not said that. The only thing I have said is that the peak rate discharge now appears to be less than before. That is not the whole issue, though, with peak rate. But let's go to the volume. You've got 4 basins. Basin A at the bottom, it's a subsurface infiltration basin, C and D. Those act as detention basins. Once you've done the hydro report, you have your time of concentrations, you have your rainfall events and all that stuff, you then run that through the modified rational, and all they have to do is in the dialog box, instead of saying rational, check the box that says modified rational, and that calculates the storage volume. We know as engineers that the rational method, straight rational method, underestimates storage volume. Now here's where it gets really complicated.
Mr. Hay, can I stop you just for a second? So I'm going to leave at 10 minutes to 11, okay? What does this mean to your client?
What it means to my client is because if you don't have enough storage volume, then you're not allowing for the sediment to stop in the basins. You're flushing it through, and you're changing the water quality. That's what it means to my client. Because if you have a requirement in the DEP also for loading ratios. Basin C and Basin D, they're supposed to have a loading ratio of 1 acre per basin for 8 acres of area contributing to the basin. Now when you don't, theirs are 23 and 32, which means that that sediment doesn't sit there and sit in the basin. We're dealing with an exceptional value watershed. It's the best that you can get. Now if your basins aren't big enough, then you flush that sediment through. Under the existing design, which may change now because as peak rates change, the water in the infiltration basin, which is the subsurface one under the parking lot, flows back in the 100-year storm back up through the inlets and off the site. So what I'm concerned about is, are the basins properly sized? And you can't do that with the rational method. My gut feeling as an engineer that's been doing rational methods since 1966 in Vietnam, where we had as much as 28 inches of rain in 1 month, is that because they have modified the rational method, not as a modified rational method, but they've expanded the triangle, they may very well have enough storage volume. The numbers they're using are just out of realm of anything that is in the scientific data.
Okay, Mr. Hay.
What I want them to do is run it modified rational,
Okay.
check the
Can you guys
storage
do that?
volume, and
Can you
see if
guys
the
do that?
storage volume
Okay,
is
all right,
right.
we heard you. Can you do it?
But we can do it, but the modified rational is not a requirement.
Do you agree with that?
No,
That it's
I
not
do
a requirement?
Do not.
In the 2-year storm
Okay, hold on a
event,
second, hold on a second. You say it's not a requirement, he says it is. It is a requirement.
I'm not talking this 2-year storm event. That's erosion sediment control. Post-construction stormwater deals with all. The rational method discussed in detail above has been adopted to include estimates of runoff hydrographs and volumes through the modified rational method. Due to the limitations of the rational method itself, see above, as well as assumptions in the modified rational method, the storm duration, this method, in other words, the rational method, should not be used to calculate water quality, infiltration, or capture
Mr.
volume.
Hay, you'll make more friends if you don't yell at us.
I'm not trying to yell, I'm just
Okay,
trying to
go.
make it loud enough.
Don't make it loud enough, you're doing just fine.
That is
How do
section
you, how do you respond, Hannah?
section, what, sir?
He wants a section. 8.3.
The township has their EP requirements to use certain items, and let me just make this statement. What I heard from Mr. Hay, and I'll ask you a question, are you more concerned during construction or after construction?
I'm concerned with both.
Okay, because of the discussion with the silt filling up the basins, and so I didn't know.
Silt's gonna fill up the basins after construction too, you got playing fields.
Okay, Go back to my original question.
Okay.
How do you respond to his complaint?
And with that, the Saldo also has regulations on the type of stormwater calculations that are required to meet your ordinances.
Is it your position that you're in compliance with the SALDO?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Bob,
Yeah.
Bob,
I'm listening.
what is your position concerning his complaint, his response?
Well, again, I haven't sat down and looked at the minutia like both of these guys have done. But I do have some backup data, and I've talked with guys in our firm about the ascending legs and the descending legs and the modified rational and the universal rational equations. And a 2 coming up and a 5 coming down mimic the universal rational hydrograph. Our firm uses a 3 and an 8. You get 3 engineers in a room and a designer of some of the software, and there will be hours and hours of
Bob,
discussion.
if you were
on
to
which one
advise
is
the
correct.
board, would you say that this is an issue we need to continue to investigate, or one that we should move on from?
My thoughts are that this seems to be the main issue that these gentlemen here have.
So your answer is, do we continue to investigate, or do we move on?
I don't know that this is the venue to investigate, but my thoughts on that were that I was going to say, this appears to be the main issue. Let's get these 2 parties to come to agreement on that main issue.
If they can't.
Well, let me ask a question, okay?
Professional disagreement.
We may
And
not,
I want to
though.
figure out, how do we resolve this professional disagreement?
Let me ask this question. Mr. Hague made a statement, and correct me if I'm wrong, sir. You said that the issue is the size of the basin is inadequate. Okay, now,
No, I'm not saying they're inadequate. I'm saying I don't know whether they're adequate or not adequate because they used a computation method.
okay, now,
which is
let me
someplace
just
between here and-
ask this question. We're all laymen here. If the size of the basin is a 50-gallon drum, okay? And if they're saying a 50-gallon drum is adequate, how many gallon drum would you suggest?
What would I suggest?
Yes.
I would suggest you take the model, if they've corrected all the errors in the model, the delineation of the drainage pathways, the T sub Cs.
Well, if they did all that, how big of a drum do we need?
Let me answer the question.
Let him finish.
Let me answer the question. You take the model that you've now made all the corrections that were mentioned in section 1 and section 2. You've already got it on the computer, you hit the button that says modified rational, which DEP says to use, you calculate the basin volumes. You calculate the basin volumes and you compare that to what their model says, and you then determine whether or not their model is consistent. It's simple.
I understand what you're saying, but you're not answering my question.
Let's assume that he does that, okay? And let's assume that the number that comes up is one that you now are not happy with, okay? Let's assume that the board doesn't modify the plan. What's your next step?
I'm not prepared to tell you what my next step is, but I have quite a few next steps.
Well, we're asking you because we want to know, what it is.
You have a
We
letter,
understand what
you
you're.
have a letter from DEP.
Let me finish,
No,
Mr.
wait,
Hayden.
All right, I thought you were done with your question.
No. Well, we're trying to, I'm trying to get it.
Hash down.
You've explained what your concern is and how it affects your client. And I think we understand what your professional disagreement is between engineers, okay? I understand it's over a calculation and the methodology that was used to come up with that calculation, okay? I've asked you if they follow your methodology and they come up with a number and you're still not happy with it, I'm going to ask you again, where does this go? Because it's
If-
my understanding that we are here today merely as concerned citizens. We're trying to address an issue, but I'm not sure we have to do anything. Are you telling us that we have to do something?
I'm
That's
telling-
my question to you.
Yes, I am telling you have to do something for 2 reasons.
Okay, good.
You got a letter 14th of June that went to Paul from the EP that says you will respond within 30 days to every comment made in Mr. Hague's letter. Have you seen that letter?
I'm not the engineer, sir. I'm
Well,
not gonna
you're the,
answer
you're
your
the
question.
attorney, the solicitor for the township.
I don't respond to those things, so.
No, you don't
And I'm not
respond, but
taking
are you
questions
aware of
from
the
you
letter?
today. I'm not taking questions from you today, okay?
All right.
We're here to listen to you people.
All right.
And I'm trying to figure out where we're going.
More likely
okay?
than not is that
If you're gonna continue to talk, okay, we're not gonna get anywhere. I'm trying to run this meeting, okay?
you asked me what my
I
next
don't
steps
remember
were.
seeing that letter.
Was
So
it
it's
shipped here?
So it's the township's position, we did not get a letter.
I don't know yet. We're trying
I
to
was just
investigate
given the
this.
letter 10 minutes ago by your, right there.
Okay, so we understand that, at least according to you, we have to respond to this letter, okay? So we respond to the letter. What happens next?
Then DEP, if you just respond to the letter and we don't work something out, then DEP could very well require you to submit a modification of the permit.
Good, that's what I needed to know.
Okay, Bob,
That's
what does
I
it
needed
say?
to know.
It says the department is hereby sending a copy of the entire submission, including all comments and concerns raised by Mr. Hague, to read, review, and submit a written response to each item within 30 days from the date of this letter. And the letter is dated June 14th of this year. I have not seen that.
Let's put it back this way. You said, what would my comments be if Hanover runs the model for basin storage using the modified rational, which DEP says they have to do, or should do, or TR55, I don't care either one. And that determines that the basins are large enough. Then I don't have a bitch if the basins are large enough, because all I can ask is that the basins be properly sized. Now, it gets a little bit beyond that too, because, are you from the public?
Yes.
All right. Close your ears, will you?
No, that's
All
not
right.
how we deal here.
All right.
Above board.
Barry Azette and Associates was asked back in December to review the plan for compliance with the SALDO. And Bob sent an email back to Justin Dresch and said, I have reviewed it in general compliance with the SALDO. That's what he said, general compliance. Generally in compliance with the SALDO. I found 17 violations of the SALDO in my first letter. I went back and looked at it again. There's 24, 25. They're minor, but they're not all, they're valid comments concerning the SALDO. Now, here's my concern what I expressed at the July 1st meeting. If you waive all that, then the next guy that comes down the line and wants to put in a development, he's going to ask for the same waivers, and you have no basis not to give them. So let's go here. We now know that the peak rates have changed. They're better, evidently. Somebody gives me the hydro report, I'll look at it. All I'm saying is, did you make the correction I said that was an issue? I'm not saying use a different methodology on how you calculate the T sub C, but there's some standards about that you do it. You know, you take the error that said this was 31 minutes on the T sub C, and you put it in the model at 25, correct it. All right, then you run the basin routing using the modified rational. Now, your saldo says that if you use the modified rational, you gotta verify it by the TR55. That's what the saldo says.
I understand.
All right,
where
you
you're
do
going.
that, the basins come out okay, all right? That solves the basin issue of storage volume. There are still some other issues of infiltration. Now, and let me back off here. The site is a lousy freaking site. It's overdeveloped. It's a lousy site. There's too much on the site. You've got type B, type C soils. Type B soils are supposed to be the better soils for infiltration, but when the Hanover did the infiltration testing, which I thought was a very good report, in July of 2012, it turned out that the type C soils, which are supposed to be the worst ones for infiltration, turned out to be better than the type B soils. Now, you had said there's areas on that site that you can increase infiltration in the area of basin C and D. And that's a soccer field up there. You can move the soccer field. You can infiltrate because you had infiltration testing in that area that came out positive. If you're not going to put this whole development ever funded, then move that soccer field, expand C and D basins for infiltration. That will take and also act as settling basins that will reduce the sediment pass-through. And where does that sediment go? It goes into that monstrous subsurface infiltration basin that if you ever have to renovate it, you're going to have to tear the whole thing out to do it because it's underground. So, if the peak rates are down lower now because of the revisions, corrections, and we all make mistakes, if the basin routing on the modified rational verified by TR55 says the basins are big enough, then fine, that solves the volume issues. Then all the issue, and if they're not, there are some easy solutions how to increase the size of the basins. As I said right now, C and D, you can take that whole area and make it one larger basin. You get more infiltration, which solves your problem with sediment. It also provides you additional detention time. You can take the ball field that's down there near Basin A on the south end, you do a reverse subdivision and get rid of the two above ground absorption fields, which you don't need. You move the ball field over and you can increase that basin. Now what good does that do? You've got part of the parking lot flowing north into that subsurface infiltration basin. You don't have to flow it north, you can flow it south. There's minor things, but you can't do those design changes until you decide if the current design, peak rate volume storage, is adequate.
Your thoughts, Hanover?
Okay, just one thing, I do not agree that we have to use the modified rational. It says in the ordinance about what to use, and DEP regulations are, they're not law. They're just guidance. They're guidance. Okay. But also with this, if we run a modified rational and it says that okay, the basin would have to be large. There's two ways to look at this. You can either make a basin larger, or you're allowed to discharge up to the 100-year storm event out of that pipe or out of that thing. As I mentioned before, pre is 44 CFS in the area, post is 25.
So we can always increase the discharge if need be.
We could always increase the hole size coming out of that basin to allow more water to discharge and get to that pipe to address the numbers, okay? If you follow.
Yes.
It's just, I want to make sure you understand that may come back on, this is township property. If you have to increase the basin, you have to increase it, but if you don't, property is valuable. You're hitting the guidance of the requirements. You're far below the requirements as far as what you can discharge. I would be not serving you properly unless I say, listen, you know, land is a valuable thing, you're allowed to discharge additional water and still meet the requirements of all the rules.
So it'd be more cost effective if need be to increase the discharge instead of reinventing the wheel at this stage of the game.
Without a doubt. Plus,
Okay.
for yourself and for everybody. I mean, it's,
And that would meet the guidelines and requirements a lot better for phone
yeah, it
but
would,
affect them adversely.
correct.
And is that where we want, one of the routes we
You
want
don't
to take?
know that until you run the numbers, that's what I'm trying to get to. And there is another issue on discharge, there's another
Yeah.
issue on this discharge from the pipe under the road.
All right, Bob, just one quick question for he needs, actually all of them. From the calculations they got, we just, like Alan said, layman's term, the calculations you said you got over 120, 180, whatever hours you got on those plans. What is the percentage difference of the water from their calculations to what you figured out? Is it within the parameter of the 20%?
Didn't run calculations, folks. All I did was I reviewed their calculations, and all I'm asking them to do is to comply with the guidance.
But what
So
we're,
you're
what we're,
shooting at the hip then, because you didn't even work out all the 100 and some hours you put in this, you didn't figure out numbers? I mean, to me, not to say anything about different engineers, they did calculations, they gave me their studies, and they have it in writing. You're
First
giving
of
me
all, for me to
hearsay.
do the calculations, I'd have to have the AutoCAD files electronically, the survey data. That's their private property.
well, you
Your
could
property.
purchase them. They're, we'll
No,
be
I'm
glad
not
to
gonna
sell
do their
them to you.
calculation. I'm not gonna design their base. All I'm asking is that they need to comply with the DEP requirements and the township requirements.
Okay, so
I believe we are in
bottom line is,
compliance.
you didn't do any calculations, so you're shooting from the hip.
No, I'm not shooting from the hip.
Well, you haven't brought anything to the table as far as
No,
calculations.
no, I showed the board, and I showed DEP where their calculations were wrong. I asked them to correct them.
I don't believe you showed them that their calculations were wrong. I believe what you addressed was you had a different methodology of arriving at the ends of a mean than Hanover engineers. Just because they used a different method don't mean that their method is wrong.
Alan, they've gone back and they've corrected the mistakes in their calculations. They've gone from 52 CFS to 44. So clearly, my comments were valid. Now let's talk about the culvert under the road. When you put in the driveway number 1 without a culvert, PennDOT says 10-year flow in the gutter, 25-year flow through the culvert. Well, what you're doing,
How many year?
culverts are typically designed for 25-year flows in the culvert. The gutters are typically designed for 10. Now that's
Yep.
it changes. That culvert was never designed. We're talking about 44 QFS, CFS discharge now to that culvert. The culvert could take 14.
Right.
We're not designing it for that. But what you've done is that by putting that driveway in the way it was put in to meet the PennDOT requirements, you now reach a certain point of time, which may be the 25-year storm, maybe the 50-year storm, because the road has a dip in it, that you're now pushing more water across the road onto the Smith property than would normally go across the road. That's a fact.
From what I understand, and Paul, PennDOT has made some minor adjustments to the plans. The driveway was lowered so that those peak storms stay in the swale. That doesn't happen.
They did.
Second,
Well, Melissa Malkin, when I
And
talked
on
to
my
Melissa,
part.
when I sent an email to Melissa Malkin last week, she said that they had not done reviewing the plans and they hadn't done a thing. Now, if they've made adjustments to lower that so that the peak storms stay in the swale, then I'd like to see the revised drawings because I'm not aware of any of that.
Let me explain what they're doing. They're out there right now. Actually, you can go out there and they have the transit and everything all set up, and I'm sure you know how to use all that stuff. They already had set it up. What they did was, on the plan, on the HOP plan, it shows from the white line 10 feet out, 2% grade, which is standard throughout all PennDOT's roads.
Right.
So they took that 2% grade and ran from the white line to the center of the swale. Because when they did their calculations, there's no way they could put a pipe in, even an elliptical pipe, having the proper 15 inches of top coverage to be able to put a pipe in across the road there,
I
across
disagree
that
with
drain.
that. I think we can put in a couple 12 inches, but that's beside the point. So what you're saying is they moved the point of vertical intersection
Correct.
more towards the property.
To 44 feet or 43 feet from the white line back, did a complete 2% grade. So now when you go out there physically right now, you can see with your eye, you can pull the trans, everything's out there right now. You can look down there. That water will go across driveway, the south driveway, before it even goes across 903.
As long as the point of vertical intersection is less than the lowest point along the curve, or the shoulder, then the water should go across the driveway number one.
South driveway. Yeah.
Now, Melissa Malpin has not said a thing to me about that.
No, they were out there and they ripped this driveway out again. Everybody keeps saying, well, that's the way PennDOT works. You take things out 2 or 3 times before they're happy.
Well, I know they're that, but I do think they could have put a couple 12-inch barrels in there and carried the flow. And our only concern was that we don't throw additional stormwater across the road.
Right, but they don't allow you to use the plastic, you run the concrete.
No, you wouldn't run plastic, that'd be a little.
No, you gotta run concrete, that's their code, and with
Well,
that.
you can get a 12-inch concrete, you can. I mean, it's tight, and because you've got 15 inches of cover, it's real tight.
Well, if you shoot the numbers, it's not tight, it's not gonna work.
You do a little bit of grading in the swale.
Well, that's the difference,
Okay,
you'd
all
have
right.
to grade everything,
All right,
yes,
all right, all right,
everything.
all right. Where I want to leave this is this. The big concern was the hydro report with the peak flows. Now Hanover is saying that they revised that, the peak flows are down. If the hydro report is a valid hydro report, it meets the generally accepted design standard. Then what I want is the thing run by the modified rational method, which DEP says you've got to do. They say you can't use the rational, and that's what they did, was use the rational. There's a whole bunch of assumptions that go in the rational that don't fit this site. They don't. They're just a whole bunch of assumptions. This site